All right, let's talk about something that can be the most critical, and let's be honest, the most stressful part of getting Social Security disability benefits: the hearing. This is your big moment to actually make your case to a person, and we're going to break down exactly how to nail it. So, if just the thought of this hearing makes your stomach do flip-flops, I get it. You are definitely not alone. It's a huge deal, and feeling anxious is totally normal. But here's the thing: that anxiety doesn't have to run the show. In fact, you know what? Let's kick this off with some really good news. A recent analysis found that 54% of people who get to the hearing stage actually win their benefits. That's more than half. So success isn't just some long shot. If you prepare the right way, it's actually the most likely outcome. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with why this hearing is such a big deal. Then we'll get into the prep work, how to handle the judge's questions, who else is in the room with you, and finally, we'll tackle the new world of phone hearings. So why all the pressure on this one day? Well, because the hearing is pretty much your best and only chance to speak directly to the judge, the one person who actually makes the final call on your claim. Trying to appeal after this gets way, way harder, so you really got to make this one count. Look, winning your hearing doesn't just happen the moment you sit down. Success starts way before that. It starts with preparation. Getting organized doesn't just make your case stronger, it gives you a sense of control. And trust me, that's the best possible antidote to all that anxiety. So how do you get organized? It really comes down to these 5 simple steps. First, get a calendar and put every single deadline and doctor's appointment on it. Second, become a pack rat for your medical records. Keep everything, even stuff that seems minor. Third, organize it all so you can find things in a flash. Fourth, have one separate folder just for letters. And last but not least, keep all this stuff somewhere safe. This isn't just about being tidy. You're building the entire foundation for your case. And now, for the main event, your testimony. This is where you connect all the dots for the judge. You show them how the stuff in your medical records actually impacts your ability to work day to day. How you answer these questions is absolutely everything. Now, you have to walk a really fine line here because your credibility is king. If you say your pain is a 10 out of 10, 24/7, a judge is going to think, really? It just doesn't sound believable. But on the flip side, a lot of us are taught to tough it out and downplay our pain. This is not the time for that. You have to be honest about what a typical day, or even a bad day, really looks like for you. In that hearing room, details are your absolute best friend. The judge can't feel your pain, right? They can't understand your fatigue unless you paint them a picture. A vague answer like, "I can't walk for very long," is useless. To a judge, does that mean an hour, 20 minutes? But when you say, "I can't stand or walk for more than 15 minutes, bam, that's a concrete limitation they can actually work with. Okay, this next one is tough, but it's so important. Answer only the question you are asked, then stop talking. It's so natural when you're nervous to just keep talking, to over-explain, but that's where you can get into trouble. You might accidentally say something that sounds like it contradicts your medical file, or just get way off track. Be direct, be short, and trust that if the judge wants to know more, they'll ask. And here are a few more vital tips. First, consistency. The judge has your entire file right there. What you say has to match what you wrote. Second, answer for your average or bad days. Don't base your answers on the one good day you had last month. Also, resist that urge to jump in when the judge is talking to someone else. And finally, no matter what, be polite. It can be frustrating, but that judge holds your future in their hands. Okay, let's pull back the curtain on the hearing itself. It's way less scary when you know who's in the room and what their job is. Besides you and your lawyer, you're going to see 2 other key people. First, and most importantly, is the administrative law judge, the ALJ. This is the person. They run the show, they ask the questions, and they are the one and only person who decides your case. Their entire job is to figure out if you're credible and if your condition truly stops you from working. Now, a judge can't just decide they don't believe you because they're having a bad day. They have to follow a legal 2-step process. First, they look at your medical records for proof of a condition that could cause the symptoms you're describing. Then, and this is key, they have to accept what you say about your symptoms unless they find clear and convincing reasons not to, like prove you're faking. The other person in the room is the vocational expert, or VE. This person is an expert on one thing: jobs. They don't know you, they don't know your case. Their only role is to answer what-if questions from the judge. And listen up, because this is probably the most misunderstood part of a hearing. The VE will start listing off jobs, and it can send you into a full-blown panic. You're thinking, oh my God, he just said I could be a ticket taker. I've lost. But that's not what's happening. The judge is just asking, hey, VE, what if a hypothetical person had these limitations? Could they work? The judge hasn't decided if those limitations are your limitations yet. It's just a normal required step in the process. So these days, a lot of hearings aren't even in a courtroom anymore. They're on the phone. And while that sounds convenient, it comes with its own set of challenges you need to be ready for. This quote from someone on Reddit just says it all, doesn't it? You wait all this time for your big day, and the idea that a bad connection or some technical glitch could mess it all up is just terrifying. But the solution here is actually pretty simple. You have to be proactive. If you have terrible cell service where you live, or your phone's been weird, don't just cross your fingers and hope to the best. Tell the hearing office and your lawyer about it way ahead of time. They can't help you fix a problem they don't know exists. So here's a quick checklist to make sure your phone hearing goes smoothly. If you can, use a landline. And never, ever use a speakerphone. Find a quiet room where no one will bother you. The call is going to come from an unblocked number, so make sure your phone is set up to receive it. If you can't hear something, speak up right away. And since the judge can't see you, you have to be extra descriptive. Say, the pain is in my right elbow, not it hurts here. Oh, and expect delays. It's normal for them to run late, so don't panic if the call isn't on the dot. So when you boil it all down, winning your hearing really comes down to these 4 things. Preparation, get all your ducks in a row beforehand. Honesty, be real and believable. Specificity, paint a clear picture with details. And consistency, make sure your story matches your paperwork. Which brings us to this final question. It's easy to feel like just a nervous applicant who's being put through the ringer. But by understanding how all this works, and by doing your homework, you stop being just an applicant. You become a self-advocate. And that, right there, is the person who wins their case.
millions of Americans face a life-altering disability, their journey for help doesn't start in some government office. It starts quietly, in private, with just a few words typed into a search bar. And these aren't just random questions. They're the very first step in a journey that will change everything. So let's explore what these private searches tell us about a very public, and honestly, a very bewildering system.
All right, so just think about it for a second. If you or someone you loved suddenly couldn't work anymore, what would be your very first move to get help? I mean, where do you even start?
Well, the answer for pretty much everyone these days is right here. It's a search bar. You know, we picture these long lines, sterile government buildings, but the real front door to America's safety net isn't an official website. It's not a 1-800 number. It's Google.
But here's the thing. That simple little search, it's just the tip of this massive, massive iceberg of anxiety, confusion, and frankly, desperation. And it's what's hiding under the water that tells the real story about how this all works.
Okay, so let's start at the top, right? The very tip of that iceberg. This is where people are just fumbling in the dark, looking for the on switch to a process that feels impossibly complicated from the get-go.
I mean, just look at these numbers. It's wild. Over 2,500 people every single month are typing in that exact phrase, how to apply for Social Security disability. But look at the other top searches. They tell you something really important. They're all about getting ready for a fight. What documents do I need? People know instinctively that this is going to be a bureaucratic battle. They're trying to arm themselves before they've even stepped onto the battlefield.
All right, so once you figure out how to apply, bam, you immediately hit this brick wall of government speak, of jargon. And this is where we go a little deeper into the iceberg. This part is all about translation. People desperately trying to figure out what the official rules actually mean for their real lives.
And this table, it shows the #1 point of confusion right off the bat. There are two totally different programs. You've got SSDI, which is basically an insurance program you paid for with your taxes, and then there's SSI, which is a welfare program. People search difference between SSDI and SSI all the time, because figuring out which one of these buckets you're supposed to be in, well, that determines everything.
So for SSDI, the insurance one, it all comes down to this idea of work credits. Basically, you got to have about 10 years of work under your belt, and a chunk of that has to be recent. And this one little rule, man, it sends people scrambling to search engines, because it's a tricky math problem. And if you get the math wrong, you're just out. Game over, period.
Okay, this right here, this gets to the very heart of it. The government asks this: are you engaging in substantial gainful activity? I mean, who talks like that, for real? A normal person with bills piling up just asks, how much can I earn and not get kicked off disability? See the difference? The search engine has become the essential, unofficial translator between a person's life and the system's rules.
Okay, let's go deeper down the iceberg now, because under all that bureaucratic confusion, you find the two questions that are at the heart of everything, the real survival questions. Can I afford to live, and am I sick enough?
Let's hit some numbers that honestly probably keep a lot of people up at night. First up, the average monthly payment for SSDI, $1,537. Just let that sink in. For most people, that's the number they're staring at trying to figure out how to make rent, groceries, and medical bills work.
And then there's this. Remember that crazy phrase, substantial gainful activity? Well, this is the dollar amount attached to it. If you try to work a little bit and you make even one single dollar over this, the government basically says you're not disabled. It doesn't matter what your doctor says, doesn't matter what your MRI shows.
And it gets even tougher if you're on SSI, the program based on need. Look at this. You cannot have more than $2 grand in assets total to your name. And that limit hasn't been updated in decades. It's basically a poverty trap. And it's why you see these heartbreaking searches like, does having a car count for SSI, as people try to navigate this minefield without losing their only lifeline.
So that's the money side. What about the health side? Well, people aren't just Googling disability, right? They're typing in their actual diagnosis: degenerative disc disease, anxiety, PTSD. They're trying to see if their specific illness is on some magic government list. And what we see over and over are two big themes: chronic physical pain and a huge, huge surge in searches related to mental health.
Okay, so this is where we get to the really rough part of the journey, the deep, dark part of the iceberg. Because for most people, after all that work, all that searching, the first answer they get from the system is just no. And that's the moment an application becomes a battle.
The numbers don't lie. It's stark.
Roughly 2 out of every 3 people are denied right away. So think about that. That's a critical turning point. Suddenly, all those searches for how to apply, they vanish, and they're replaced with how to appeal. The word no isn't the end of the road. For most, it's the beginning of the real fight.
And wow, what a fight it is. It's not just one appeal. No. There are four potential levels. This thing can drag out for years, from a simple paper review all the way to a federal court case. And every single step is another maze people are trying to solve with a search bar.
So put yourself in their shoes. You're sick, you can't work, you're facing this years-long legal battle. What do? Yep, you search for a lawyer. And that phrase, no win, no fee disability lawyer, is one of the biggest, most competitive search terms out there. It's basically people shouting into the void, I can't do this alone.
Okay, let's come back up to the surface. We've been deep in the weeds of this journey. What does all this frantic private searching tell us about the system itself? What's the hidden story here?
So here's one of the wildest things the search data shows us. It's all about your age. Turns out there's this special set of rules, they call them the grid rules, that basically make it easier to get approved once you hit 50. The system kind of admits that it's harder for an older worker with a bad back to just learn to code. And that's why disability over 50 is a monster search term. People have figured out this secret handshake, that in this system, your age can matter just as much as your medical records.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's this. You've got this incredibly complex system that speaks in jargon, and then you have real people living through real-life crises. The search engine, it's become the only bridge between them. It's the translator. It takes our messy human problems and turns them into the neat bureaucratic questions the system can understand.
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. In a system that's just too confusing and too swamped to help people one-on-one, has the simple search bar become our new unofficial caseworker? It's a question that tells us a whole lot about our technology, but maybe even more about the safety nets we're supposed to rely on. Really makes you think.
All right, let's talk about applying for Social Security disability. There's this one document that can literally make or break your entire claim. It's the Work History Report, Form SSA 3369-BK. And today, we're going to dive deep and figure out how to master this thing, how to turn it into the strongest part of your whole application.
So why does this form matter so much? I know what you're probably thinking. It's just a list of my old jobs, right? How hard can that be? Well, you'd be surprised. This form, right here, is exactly where so many disability claims just completely stumble and fall. I mean, could one single form really decide your future? It sounds a little dramatic, I know. But when you're talking about getting the benefits you really need, the stakes are just incredibly high. The information you put down here, it has massive implications for your whole case. Because for a whole lot of disability claims, this is that form. Here's why it's so critical. The Social Security Administration, the SSA, they use this form to answer two huge questions. First, does your medical condition stop you from doing the work you used to do? And second, does it stop you from doing any other kind of work out there? The answers you give on this form, that's their main piece of evidence.
Okay, so before we really get into the nitty-gritty of filling this out, there's a huge, and I mean huge, positive change you absolutely need to know about. As of June 2024, the SSA went and updated a rule that completely simplifies this whole process. It makes things so much clearer for applicants.
And look, the difference is like night and day. Before, you had to try and remember and document a full 15 years of work history. Can you imagine? Now, you only need to focus on the last 5. This is a total game changer because it lets you give really accurate, super detailed information for the period that actually matters most.
Okay, so keeping that awesome new 5-year window in mind, let's break down exactly how to describe your work history. We're talking about the kind of detail that builds a totally rock-solid claim. Now, getting the basics right is key. These things might seem simple, but little errors here can create big inconsistencies down the line. First off, always list your jobs starting with the most recent one first. Use your official job title, not a nickname. And here's a super common mistake people make. For type of business, they want the industry, not the company name. So think coffee shop, not Starbucks, or warehouse operations, not Amazon. And yeah, do your best to be as precise as you possibly can with those start and end dates. Okay, listen up, because this next part, this is the absolute heart of the form. I can't stress this enough. This is where most people make mistakes that really hurt their claim. Describing your day-to-day duties is, without a doubt, the most important section of this entire thing. This is your chance to paint a picture for the SSA to show them the actual physical and mental demands of your job. If you give vague answers here, it's just a recipe for denial. Just look at the power of being specific. The bad example: answered phones and did computer work. That tells the SSA basically nothing, right? But the good example on the right, wow. It gets into the how long, the how much. It gives them concrete numbers to work with. A 6-line phone system for 3 hours a day, typing reports for 4 hours, lifting 25-pound boxes 5 times a day. See? That is the level of detail that paints a crystal clear picture for them. All right, as you get to the part about physical demands, there's one golden rule you have to follow. It's a really simple check, but it prevents a major red flag on your application. So, do your hours add up? Here's the rule. The hours you put down for sitting, plus the hours for standing, plus the hours for walking, they have to equal your total workday. It's that simple. If you worked an 8-hour day, those 3 numbers have to add up to 8. If they don't, it immediately throws up a red flag and makes them doubt everything else you've written.
Next up, we've got lifting and carrying. Now, this is important. This isn't about what you think sometimes or often means. The SSA has very, very specific definitions for these words.
And you've got to know their language. For the SSA, occasionally means up to a third of the workday. Frequently is from 1/3 up to 2/3, and constantly is 2/3 or more. So think about it. If you are listing 10-pound boxes for most of your shift, that's probably frequently or even constantly. But if you only lifted a heavy 50-pound box like once a week, that's just occasionally. Using their exact terms is absolutely essential.
All right, now let's talk about what I consider your secret weapon on this form. It's this little section at the very end called Remarks. And you know what? Most people either just ignore it or leave it totally blank. And that is a huge, huge mistake. A massive missed opportunity.
You should think of this space as your personal statement for your work history. You have to use it wisely. This is your one chance to give all the important context that the little checkboxes and short answer boxes just can't capture. It's where you get to connect the dots for the person reviewing your file and explain the why behind everything. So what kind of stuff should you explain in remarks? Oh, only the most vital details. Did your boss give you a special ergonomic chair for your back pain? Write that down. Did you have to leave a job because your condition made the physical demands just impossible? State that clearly. Were your job duties changed over time because of your health? Put it in there. Did you miss a ton of work right before you had to stop completely? Explain that here. This kind of context is pure gold for your claim.
Okay, so we've walked through the whole form. Before we wrap this up, let's do a quick final check. Let's go over the most common mistakes that can lead to a denial so you can make sure to avoid them.
So here are the 5 big steps to avoid a denial. Number 1, be specific, not vague. We talked about that. 2, make sure your hours match up. 3, mention all the accommodations you received. 4, use that remarks section. And finally, number 5, be honest, don't exaggerate. Seriously, being accurate and honest is your single greatest asset here. Remember, when you master this form, you're not just listing old jobs. You're building the entire foundation of your disability claim. You're showing them with clear, hard evidence exactly how your condition impacts your ability to work. So take a second and think about your own history through this new lens. What's that one crucial detail you're now going to make sure you include?